Welcome, Gunrunner.
The glory days of the video game arcade might be a long way behind us, sadly, but they certainly haven't been forgotten. And in this video I'm going to take you back nearly 40 years to those heady days that played such an important part in our youth. The year is 1981 and we're all present at one of the greatest times in coin-op video gaming history. You won't find any fruit machines, penny pushers or fixed price machines here. These are the true arcade classics that lit up dingy smoke-filled rooms, sat on stained carpets and delighted audiences whilst they drained their pockets of all their spare change. 1981 set record revenues for arcade games and was part of the so-called golden generation. Names like Sega, Atari, Konami, Midway and Nintendo have become synonymous with gaming, and so it will be no surprise to see them feature heavily in this particular list. This is where many of today's popular franchises started, multiple innovations took place, and the genres that we know and love today were formed. All of these titles play every bit as well today as they did back then and deserve to be remembered as true classics in the annals of video game history. There's an awful lot of bona fide classics to cover this year, and there was more than a few that I wanted to include that didn't quite make the final cut, like Asteroids Deluxe, Ladybug and Mousetrap, so please pay attention to all of these and see if you can spot any other all-time greats that should have maybe made the list. One of the earliest and most iconic games released by the now world famous Konami, the success of the game saw almost endless clones released for various home formats. Scramble is a horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up where you fly as a spaceship over a planet's surface and then through caverns destroying the enemy. You can both shoot and bomb, with the latter being used to not just hit ground targets but also destroy fuel tanks. Your spaceship only has limited fuel, this must be constantly replenished in this manner. Scramble was famously credited as a prequel to the later Gradius franchise. Solar Fox is a wonderfully original title that's kind of like a mashup of Exidy's Targ and Pac-Man. You are the Solar Fox, a spacecraft you must save the Earth by flying into space and collecting up all the glowing energy pods. Trying to stop you are two enemy craft that fly around the perimeter of the screen endlessly raining down projectiles. The pods are laid out in patterns and must be collected in the quickest time possible. By completing each stage quickly you can build up a meter that allows you to skip a level, or rack as it's called here. This is a really nice take on the tired maze game format. Astro Blaster is Sega's take on the popular space shooter genre that was popularised by titles such as Space Invaders and Galaxian. However, it's a bit more than just a blatant clone, and that's probably why the game proved to be pretty successful. The first core feature is the digitised speech that introduces each game. The second feature that changes things up even more comes in the form of a temperature gauge for your weapon. The more you fire, the more this goes up, and if it reaches its peak, it overheats. The game was famously copied in the home by Activision's Mega Mania. There's some contention over what the very first platform game was. While most people agree that the honours have to be awarded to Universal Space Panic from 1980, some people like to argue that the game's lack of jumping rules it out. Some will even point to this game, Rock-Ola's Jump Bug, that not only features a jumping mechanic very similar to the one found in most platformers, but it also requires you to collect objects and features horizontal scrolling. But the fact you control a car that has the ability to shoot aliens rules it out in my opinion, but it's certainly an interesting argument. A game from Konami's early years, Amidar is a title that, despite not being famous in name, is one of those coin-ops that you probably played a clone of at some point over the years on a home system without even knowing it. The idea of the game is to move your character, a gorilla, around the screen trying to fill in all the boxes that make up the playfield. You do this by painting around each one whilst avoiding the relentless enemies. It's possible to take out these annoying foes though in a rather Pac-Man-like fashion. Amidar is one of the most influential maze games released in the early 80s. Vanguard was very much the game that put Japanese company SNK on the map, long before the Neo Geo came along. What made this shoot 'em up really stand out from the crowd at the time is that it has stages that scroll horizontally, vertically and even diagonally too. In fact, it was one of the first shooters to feature multi-directional scrolling, and also one of the first to have multicolour graphics too. Another really unique feature of Vanguard is that your ship can shoot in all 4 directions, and the cabinet features dual sticks to facilitate this, meaning the home ports were never quite as good. The release of Pac-Man in 1980 and the huge success it generated saw nearly all of Namco and Midway's arcade rivals try to come up with their own variations on the theme. Lock and Chase is dated each century into the maze game genre. You play the part of a burglar robbing a bank of all its gold, which replaces the power pellets of Pac-Man. The bank is like a maze, of course, and you are not the only one there. 4 security guards are trying to stop you. Sounds just like Pac-Man, right? Yes indeed, but the lack of power pills and the need to open and close doors really changes things up. Gorf was a massive arcade hit for Bally Midway back in '81 and was declared by many at the time to be the ultimate space shooter. This is because the game took the best bits from other popular blasters of the time, like Space Invaders, Galaxian, Gyrus and Phoenix, and combined them all into a multi-level spectacular. We have standard space battles, swooping kamikaze attack patterns, a 3D space warp, and even a big boss battle. It's a shame that the compilation-like ideas of Gorf weren't expanded further with sequels, because there was a lot of potential to take this brilliant concept further. When Turbo first debuted, it absolutely wowed audiences with its impressive pseudo 3D visuals, something Sega would later perfect with their superscalar hardware and games like Outrun and Afterburner. Turbo requires the player to navigate a road race through different urban and rural locations, with differing weather conditions and changing times of day. In order to proceed, the player must pass and stay ahead of at least 30 competing cars before the time expires. This requires a perfect balance of speed and precision. Turbo still impresses very much in the present day. At a time when they were very much the rage, it's pretty incredible to think that Omega Race was the one and only vector-based arcade game released by Midway. The objective is to clear the glowing playfield of all the enemies whilst avoiding the mines they leave behind. If you take too long, the mine-dropping ships change into fast-firing combat craft that are much harder to get rid of. The play area is surrounded by an energy field with another barrier in the centre of the screen too, which is cleverly used as a status panel. It's a shame this game's become so obscure because it still has a lot to offer. The original Donkey Kong coin-op was Nintendo's first big hit, and introduced us not only to a big angry ape, but also to a rotund Italian fellow in a rather fetching dungarees. I think everyone out there has played Donkey Kong by now, but for those who somehow haven't, the idea of the game is to get Mario to the top of 4 different screens to rescue his girlfriend Pauline. Also at the top of each screen is our friend Donkey Kong throwing stuff at Mario in order to try and stop him. Donkey Kong is credited as being one of the very first platformers and broke a lot of new ground for the genre. The unofficial sequel to the hugely successful Scramble, which was featured earlier in this video, Super Cobra took the basic design from that game, swapped out the spaceship for a chopper, and made a few other minor modifications too. The idea of the game is to fly your helicopter through the tight caverns, taking out rockets, alien spacecraft and gun turrets. You must also collect fuel to keep your chopper in the air, and you do this by actually bombing the fuel tanks. Although it's not as well known, I've always preferred Super Cobra to Scramble, and it's still a game I go back to often. Starring a cheeky little character called Winky, your mission in Exodus Venture is to recover the stolen treasures from a series of dungeons. There are 3 levels in total, which each contain 4 rooms, and these are contained within a sort of overworld map, years before Super Mario World or Zelda did such a thing. The map allows you to decide in what order you want to tackle the rooms and how you want to enter them, as each room has multiple entrances and exits. One of the earliest examples of an arcade dungeon crawler, Venture is not only very innovative but also very enjoyable too. Gallagher is the sequel to the groundbreaking Galaxian, and is one of the earliest examples out there of what we now know as the vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. It uses a constantly moving starfield in the background to simulate scrolling, and the enemies arrive in attack patterns as opposed to the fixed formations of Galaxian. There are now very distinct stages that differ from one another rather than just repeating over and over with increased difficulty. The enemy behaviour is a lot more advanced too, with differing attack patterns on each stage. Gallagher is rightly regarded as one of the greatest shooters ever. Kicks is a quite simple game but also a fiendishly addictive one, where the idea is to draw boxes on the screen until they fill a certain percentage of it. Sounds easy, doesn't it? Well, it isn't, because bouncing around the screen the whole time is the kicks, and if you hit this while forming a box you lose a life. Not that the kicks is your only hazard mind, there are also the sparks, which move around the perimeter of the screen and can also follow you along any lines you make. If one hits you, then it's life lost again. Kicks has to rank up there as one of the most addictive arcade games of all time. Once you start, it's hard to stop. Midway's Satan's Hollow has to be one of the most underrated arcade games of all time. I actually think it's criminal that the game hasn't got more attention over the years. Satan's Hollow is a take on the popular Space Invaders and Galaxian theme, but one that features differing levels and a boss, Satan himself. As you blast the enemy hordes, they drop bricks that must be placed underneath the castle to make a bridge so you can enter the final battle against the fire-breathing devil. Of all the many Space Invaders type games out there to hit the arcades, this is by far my favourite. Although it was actually distributed by Sega, Frogger was the game that really put original developers Konami on the map, and they still remain one of the biggest players in the video game industry to this day. The idea of the game is to guide 5 frogs across a dangerous road and then a hazardous river to their homes on the other side. You can move in any direction using the joystick and have a time limit in which to complete your task. Frogger is a game that never seems to age. It's as fun today as it was back then, and I think this is echoed in the almost endless re-releases in various forms over the years. Dave Thurer's vector-based coin-op Tempest is often hailed as being one of the best arcade games of all time, and it's easy to understand why. The fact the game is resurrected yet again in recent years in the form of Jeff Minter's Tempest 4000 is testament to that. For those who have never played Tempest, you control a ship on the edge of a 3D web and spin around it, blasting the aliens and demons trying to climb up it. If they get to the top, they can kill you, unless you hit your Super Zapper smart bomb in time or carefully move past them as they flip. Tempest is as compulsive today as it was back in '81. But Pac-Man actually started off as nothing more than an illegal clone of Pac-Man called Crazy Otto. The developers, GCC, were already being sued by Atari over their illegal Missile Command upgrade kit, and so decided to try and sell the game to Midway. They were so impressed with it that they took it up and changed it to Ms. Pac-Man, without the permission of Namco, I may add, but it was eventually considered canon. Pac-Man already had a massive female audience, so they saw this as a great opportunity to corner that side of the market, whilst making a few gameplay tweaks and improvements too. One of Atari's most successful arcade games ever, Centipede was also one of the very first video games to be designed by a woman, one Donna Bailey, although she was assisted by the legendary Ed Log too. In Centipede, the player has to defend themselves against swarms of insects and bugs, including the giant Centipede himself, who must be destroyed piece by piece in order to complete the level. This is one of the earliest examples of a boss character in a video game. One of the most cloned video games of the era, Centipede was also followed by a very fine sequel in Millipede. And that rounds up my look at the greatest arcade games of 1981. Are there any others you can think of that should have made the list? or do you disagree with any of the entries that I did include? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Mitchell Valentino, Neptune, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Tiago Piero dos Santos Silva, and Electrum Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to a host of extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.